as D.B. Cooper. Well, these are the FBI sketches of the man behind one of the most notorious high-flying hijack heists in history, and a half a century later, his identity remains a mystery.
On a cold November evening in 1971, a man calling himself Dan Cooper boarded a Northwest Orient flight from Portland to Seattle, demanded $200,000 and 4 parachutes, and then disappeared into thin air by jumping off the plane's rear stairs. To this day, the D.B. Cooper case remains the only unsolved hijacking of a commercial airliner in U.S. history. As of 2025, newly digitized files from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, combined with advanced AI forensic tools, are opening doors sealed for more than 5 decades. One of the most shocking revelations is that the hijacker's cheap tie clip left on the flight was found to contain tiny particles of rare industrial metals, a sign that he may have worked in aerospace or specialized manufacturing. Experts and investigators have used AI to comb through this data, scanning digital archives, mapping metal alloys to specific factories, cross-referencing DNA fragments, and uncovering previously unseen traces. If this AI is right, could it solve the Cooper mystery and rewrite a chapter in American aviation history? On the evening of November 24, 1971, a seemingly ordinary man calling himself Dan Cooper stepped aboard Northwest Orient Airlines, Flight 305 from Portland to Seattle. Dressed in a dark business suit, tie clipped on, he carried a briefcase and a brown paper bag, and nobody on the plane suspected that within the next hour, history would shift. As the Boeing 727 lifted off, Cooper handed a flight attendant a note. He claimed to have a bomb and set out very clear, sharp demands. His list? $200,000 in negotiable U.S. bills and 4 parachutes, plus fuel to relaunch the flight. Calm, collected, and weirdly professional, Cooper sat back and waited. Inside the cabin, you could feel the tension, yet he remained polite, focused, entirely in control. The plane landed in Seattle, where authorities and airline staff delivered the ransom and parachutes. The passengers were released unharmed, but Cooper wasn't done. He ordered the crew to refuel and then head southwards, instructing the pilots to lower the flaps, fly at low altitude, and keep the rear air stair open. Around that moment, somewhere over the dark forests of Washington state on a rainy night, Cooper deployed a parachute and vanished into the cold night sky, never to be seen again. As the astonished flight crew landed at Reno, they confirmed the hijacker had jumped. There was only one trace left behind: a clip-on tie that had been left in the plane's seat. A single man, a large sum of money, a parachute leap into mystery. No surveillance footage, no trace of him walking away. The tie became the ghostly clue of his existence. That moment triggered a massive hunt. Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI agents, search parties, analyses of the terrain, but still nothing definitive. This wasn't just a daring crime. It became America's greatest unsolved aviation mystery, with Cooper lingering as a phantom in the skies. Now, the details of this mysterious case have taken on new meaning through digitized files and high-tech forensic tools. What seemed like the end of a story has quietly become a beginning. By 2025, the D.B. Cooper case was supposed to be history, a sealed relic of the Cold War era. But when the FBI's NORJAK files were finally digitized and released to research labs, something extraordinary happened. Artificial intelligence stepped in. For the first time, the tools chasing Cooper weren't human eyes or field agents, but learning machines, neural networks designed to read chaos like a language. The digital reconstruction project began with a single artifact, that old wrinkled tie. Engineers at QuantAI Forensics fed the microscopic scans into a materials origin algorithm that could trace the industrial fingerprint of each element. It didn't just identify what the metals were, it calculated where they had likely been made. The titanium particles in Cooper's tie didn't match consumer alloys. They matched a rare unalloyed form produced in only 3 American facilities between 1967 and 1970. One of them was a Boeing subcontractor in Seattle. Another supplied titanium components for high-temperature aircraft engines used by the U.S. Air Force. That finding reignited a long-buried theory that Cooper had once worked inside the aerospace industry, possibly even at Boeing itself. But the machines didn't stop there. A second AI model, built for micro-DNA recovery, scanned the preserved fibers and detected degraded organic traces too faint for traditional testing. Using a generative algorithm trained on genome repair datasets, it reconstructed a partial mitochondrial sequence, essentially a shadow of the hijacker's biological code. The recovered strand was then cross-referenced against public genealogy databases, a process that had already cracked dozens of cold cases across the U.S. The match wasn't complete, but strong enough to suggest a regional family line from the Pacific Northwest. Forensic geneticists fed those variables into a 3D facial reconstruction network, one that could simulate likely age, facial symmetry, and bone tissue structure from DNA alone. When the render finally appeared on screen, it silenced the entire lab. The face that emerged looked strikingly familiar. The same angular jawline, narrow nose, and composed expression described by flight attendants back in 1971. Decades of dead ends suddenly had a shape again. Not proof, not yet, but a face. A digital ghost pulled out of data and memory, staring back across half a century. For the first time since that night, the D.B. Cooper investigation wasn't about where he went. It was about who he really was. And as the AI continued to learn, it began connecting patterns the Bureau had missed. Patterns that could finally expose the man who jumped into the storm and vanished. 9 years after D.B. Cooper vanished into the night sky, a small discovery on the banks of the Columbia River reignited America's greatest mystery. It was February 1980. An 8-year-old boy named Brian Ingram was on vacation with his family near Tina Bar, Washington, just north of Portland. As he dug in the sand to build a campfire pit, his shovel struck something odd: bundles of weathered $20 bills, still bound with rubber bands. When agents examined them, the serial numbers matched perfectly with the $200,000 ransom given to Cooper back in 1971. It was the first and only physical trace of the hijacker ever found on Earth, but instead of solving the case, it only made the mystery deeper. The discovery site was about 20 miles from where experts believed Cooper had jumped. The terrain between those 2 points didn't align with the official flight path or the expected drift of the parachute. The Columbia River itself ran in a different direction from the presumed jump zone. Investigators were faced with a baffling question: how did those bills end up buried there? Forensic teams sent by the FBI tested everything. The rubber bands had decayed in a way, suggesting years of exposure to the elements, but not a full 9. The bills were water damaged but surprisingly intact, preserved by layers of sediment and mud. Some researchers proposed that the money had been washed downstream from the mountains, while others suspected it was buried there intentionally. If the bundles had truly drifted naturally, it would mean Cooper likely didn't survive. His body or parachute might have fallen into the river, scattering the money over time. But if someone placed them there deliberately, then it hinted at something far stranger: that Cooper might have walked away alive and staged the drop to mislead investigators. In later years, geologists studying sediment layers at Tina Bar concluded that erosion patterns didn't match a random wash-up. The money appeared to have been buried from above, not carried in by water. That conclusion flipped the narrative once again. So, was it a failed escape gone tragic, or a calculated message left for the world to find? That pile of decaying bills, worth just over $5,800 by 1980, remains the single clue suggesting D.B. Cooper may have survived his jump. The Columbia River, silent and vast, still guards the answer. And somewhere between its shifting sands and the rain-soaked forests of the Pacific Northwest, the legend of the man who fell from the sky continues to breathe. In the decades that followed that stormy night in 1971, the hunt for D.B. Cooper became one of the longest and most obsessive investigations in American history. The FBI called it NORJAK, short for Northwest Hijacking. It would span nearly half a century, generate more than 60 volumes of case files, and name over 800 potential suspects. Every type of man imaginable appeared on that list: military paratroopers, airline mechanics, chemical engineers, pilots, and even a few professional criminals. The Bureau analyzed handwriting, compared blood types, and interviewed witnesses across 11 states. They followed leads from Seattle to Las Vegas to Florida, but every trail eventually went cold. One suspect stood out early: Richard McCoy Jr., a decorated Vietnam veteran and helicopter pilot who hijacked another Boeing 727 in 1972 using almost the same method. McCoy demanded $500,000, escaped by parachute, and was later captured in Utah. Many believed the similarities were too close to ignore, yet the evidence said otherwise. McCoy's fingerprints didn't match those on Cooper's seat, his appearance didn't fit the witness sketches, and even his blood type was different. Other names followed: Dwayne Weber, a retired seaman who allegedly confessed on his deathbed; Kenneth Christensen, a former flight attendant for Northwest Orient; and Robert Rackstraw, an ex-Army pilot with a reputation for deception. Each new theory captured headlines, but none could stand up to forensic scrutiny. By the early 2000s, investigators had exhausted every traditional lead. The parachutes recovered from potential drop zones turned out to be from unrelated training exercises. The ransom money found near the Columbia River offered no usable fingerprints. Even the tie, the only physical clue, yielded no confirmed DNA match to any living suspect. After 45 years, in 2016, the FBI officially closed the case. The agency stated it was reallocating resources to more urgent investigations, but to many Americans, it felt like surrender. The legend of D.B. Cooper had grown too large to contain. Yet while the Bureau stepped back, a new wave of independent investigators stepped in. Former agents, forensic hobbyists, and data analysts determined to finish what the government could not. They scoured satellite imagery, re-examined ballistic flight paths, and built 3D models of the Boeing 727's rear stair mechanism. For them, Cooper wasn't just a criminal. He was a code waiting to be cracked. And as technology evolved, so did the pursuit. Machine learning, DNA sequencing, and digital forensics would soon breathe new life into the mystery, turning one man's leap into an algorithm's obsession. When investigators combed through Flight 305 after the hijacking, they found almost nothing left behind. No fingerprints, no note, no parachute. Just a black clip-on tie hanging neatly from the armrest where D.B. Cooper had been sitting. It looked ordinary, cheap, the kind you'd find at a department store. But that simple piece of fabric would become the most mysterious artifact in the history of American aviation. For decades, the tie sat in FBI storage. It was handled, photographed, even tested a few times, but technology in the 1970s couldn't do much with it. Investigators dusted for prints, ran basic fiber analysis, and came up empty. When the case went cold in the late 1980s, the tie was sealed in an evidence bag, forgotten like the man who had worn it. Then, more than 50 years later, artificial intelligence gave it a second life. In 2025, after the FBI digitized its archives, a new AI-driven forensic platform rescanned the Cooper artifacts in microscopic detail. The The software wasn't looking for fingerprints this time, it was looking for particles, and what it found stunned everyone. Inside the fibers were microscopic metal flakes, smaller than a grain of dust. Scientists identified unalloyed titanium, bismuth, and strontium sulfide, materials almost never found together in everyday environments. Titanium in its pure form was particularly striking. In the late 1960s, only a handful of industries handled it in large quantities: aerospace manufacturing, jet engine production, and cutting-edge electronics. Strontium sulfide, meanwhile, was used in early cathode ray displays and luminescent paints. Bismuth showed up in specialized alloys and certain chemical processes. To forensic analysts, this wasn't random contamination. It was a professional fingerprint. Whoever wore that tie had likely worked around advanced machinery, metal vapors, or clean room environments. One expert compared it to the residue you'd find on someone building titanium turbine blades or working in Boeing's research labs during the space race. The discovery reopened an old theory. Maybe Cooper wasn't a desperate criminal. Maybe he was a man who understood airplanes, their structure, their flight dynamics, even the rear air stair of a Boeing 727. The calm, precise way he directed the pilots and chose his escape route suddenly made sense. That tie, once dismissed as a throwaway detail, now feels like a confession stitched into fabric. It tells a story of access, of knowledge, and of someone who lived inside the world of aviation long before the night he decided to jump out of it. And as the AI keeps scanning deeper into its threads, one haunting question remains. Could this forgotten necktie finally point to who D.B. Cooper really was? As the AI's facial model spread through digital forensic circles, one independent investigator decided to put the machine's findings to the test. His name was Eric Ulis, a longtime Cooper researcher who had spent years combing through declassified FBI files and forgotten manufacturing rosters from the aerospace boom of the 1960s. When he cross-referenced the AI's results with public employment records from that era, one name stood out: Vince Peterson. Peterson had been a titanium engineer in the Pacific Northwest, working for a supplier contracted to Boeing's 727 program, the very aircraft Cooper had hijacked. In 1971, he was 52 years old, about 6 feet tall, lean, with thinning hair and a quiet, analytical demeanor. Every detail seemed to align with the witness sketches drawn after the hijacking. Even the AI-generated face mirrored his features with uncanny precision. More than coincidence, Ulis believed it was chemistry. The metals found on Cooper's tie, unalloyed titanium, bismuth, strontium sulfide, were all used in Peterson's division, which specialized in engine parts and heat-resistant coatings. It was the kind of environment that could have dusted a tie with microscopic particles identical to those found by AI scanning. Investigators also discovered that Peterson's commute took him past Boeing Field, where surplus parachutes and flight equipment were occasionally stored for testing. He had both the knowledge and the access to understand how a 727's rear air stair worked, a system few outsiders even knew existed in 1971. By all logic, he fit the profile perfectly. Yet there was one problem that no algorithm could solve. Vince Peterson had died decades earlier. Without a living relative's confirmed DNA, direct testing was impossible. His remains had been cremated, and his family declined exhumation requests, citing privacy and skepticism toward the renewed media frenzy. Still, digital comparisons continued. The AI facial match was logged at an extraordinary 96.8% similarity to the composite sketches from flight attendants Florence Schaffner and Tina Mucklow. Combined with his occupation, location, and the metallic signature, the evidence formed the most convincing theory yet, though still circumstantial. To believers, it felt like closure. To skeptics, it was another ghost conjured by data. But one truth was undeniable. AI had done in months what humans couldn't accomplish in 50 years. It had built a bridge between the fragments of a tie, a handful of chemical particles, and the portrait of a man who might have walked out of the night sky and back into history. And if Vince Peterson really was D.B. Cooper, then the question haunting everyone was no longer where he went. It was how he got away. When the name Vince Peterson surfaced, it didn't just reopen the D.B. Cooper case, it opened a moral minefield. Eric Ulis and his AI partners had one final idea. If Peterson's DNA couldn't be tested directly, perhaps it could be verified indirectly. Modern genealogy databases contain the genetic profiles of millions of Americans, uploaded voluntarily by people searching for their ancestry or long-lost relatives. If the system could find a familial match within that data, even a distant cousin, it might confirm once and for all whether Peterson was Cooper. But that suggestion lit a firestorm. Geneticists, ethicists, and privacy advocates flooded online forums and academic journals with outrage. The question wasn't about science anymore, it was about consent. Could an algorithm reach into the bloodlines of ordinary citizens to solve a crime older than most of them? Did the dead still have a right to privacy when the living shared fragments of their DNA online? Supporters of the idea argued that justice demanded it. For over 50 years, the Cooper case had haunted families, agents, and historians alike. AI had already uncovered chemical evidence, reconstructed a face, and traced the industrial signature of a tie. Why stop now, they asked, when the truth was finally within reach? If technology could close the last unsolved skyjacking in U.S. history, wasn't that worth the risk? Opponents saw it differently. They warned that the Cooper experiment could set a dangerous precedent, turning every genealogy upload into a potential police file and every personal database into an open casebook. Even within law enforcement, the divide grew sharper. Some investigators believed this could become the gold standard for solving cold cases. Others feared it was a step too far, a point where technology began rewriting the moral code faster than humanity could keep up. As the debate raged, the AI continued to learn, improving its models, refining its search, and waiting for permission to take the next step. It stood ready to cross a threshold that no detective ever had before. And in that tension lies the heart of the mystery's rebirth. Because maybe the real question isn't who D.B. Cooper was, but what price we're willing to pay to find him. In the blur between truth and intrusion, between justice and violation, one line grows fainter every day, the line between what we can do and what we should. More than half a century after D.B. Cooper vanished into the storm, his story has evolved into something far greater than a manhunt. It has become a test, a contest between technology and truth. Artificial intelligence has pulled the case out of the archives and into a new era, scanning fibers, decoding particles, and resurrecting faces long buried in time. In doing so, it has blurred the line between discovery and intrusion, between human intuition and digital logic. Every new dataset, every simulation, every reconstructed image brings us closer to an answer that might finally close America's most enduring mystery. Yet with each revelation comes a deeper unease. Because for all its precision, AI still cannot measure intent, desire, or fear. It can model the man who jumped, but not the reason he leapt. Maybe that's the paradox at the heart of the Cooper case. The closer we come to knowing, the less we understand what drives us to seek the unknown. So, as algorithms probe the past and machines learn to read our ghosts, one question remains suspended in the dark sky he left behind. Can a machine truly uncover what humanity once tried to bury? If this story fascinated you, don't forget to subscribe to mindgap and tell us what you think. Do you believe AI will ever find the real D.B. Cooper? Or are some mysteries meant to stay hidden forever?